What would you do if the proudest day of your life turned into your deepest humiliation? 30,000 feet in the air, a 17-year-old honor student, dressed in his best, clutching a ticket that symbolized years of hard work, walked onto a flight with nothing but excitement in his heart. His dreadlocks, 5 years of patience, heritage, and love were his crown. But in minutes, a flight attendant's scissors would strip away, not just his hair, but his dignity. Why would someone entrusted with passenger safety commit such an assault? Why did silence fill the cabin when cruelty unfolded in plain sight? And how could a single phone call from a furious father shake an entire airline to its knees? This isn't just about hair. It's about identity. It's about power, justice, and what happens when one family refuses to stay silent. By the end of this story, you'll see how humiliation sparked the largest discrimination reckoning in aviation history, and how a crown once cut grew back stronger than ever. If you believe every crown deserves protection, hit that like button, share this story, and don't forget to subscribe, because what you're about to hear will stay with you forever. Elias Johnson woke up before his alarm clock rang. His eyes opened slowly to the soft glow of the morning sun slipping through the curtains of his small but tidy bedroom in Atlanta. Today wasn't just any day. Today was the day he would board his first business-class flight, a gift from his father, David Johnson, for his hard-earned success. Elias lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, letting the realization sink in. 17 years old, on the edge of adulthood, about to represent his school at a national debate tournament in Boston. He had worked for this moment late nights buried in books, weekends spent practicing arguments, hours of careful preparation. And now, the flight itself felt like part of the reward. Business class, luxury, respect, proof that his hard work meant something. But as much as he looked forward to the flight, what meant even more was the ritual he knew was about to come. Every morning, without fail, at exactly 7:00 a.m., his father would call. It didn't matter if David was in a boardroom in London, at a hotel in Los Angeles, or stuck in traffic in Atlanta. 7 o'clock was sacred. That was their prayer time. Father and son, connected across miles, grounding themselves in faith and family. The phone buzzed, right on time. Elias smiled as he grabbed it. His father's face appeared on the screen, calm and strong as always, his eyes full of quiet pride. "Morning, son," David said, his voice deep but gentle. "Are you ready for your big day?" Elias nodded eagerly. "I think so." "Dad, I feel nervous, but I'm ready." David leaned closer to the camera. "Nervous means you care. It means this matters to you. But remember, you've already earned this. The flight, the competition, the recognition, it's not a gift. It's the fruit of your work." They bowed their heads together, and David began to pray. "Lord, watch over my boy today. Let him walk in wisdom. Let him travel in safety, and let him shine in every room he enters. Remind him that he carries our family's legacy with him, and that his crown is already perfect." Elias felt warmth in his chest as he whispered, "Amen." That last word, crown, meant everything. For Elias, his dreadlocks weren't just hair. They were years of growth, years of identity carefully woven strand by strand. His grandmother, Ruth, had been the one to start them, guiding his hands, teaching him how to care for each lock, how to moisturize, twist, and protect them. More than that, she taught him their meaning. "These locks are your crown, baby," Grandma Ruth always said. Kings and queens wore their crowns with pride. You wear yours the same way. Every strand is your history, your resilience, your dignity. It had been 5 years since that first twist. 5 years of care, patience, and pride. Each morning, Elias stood before the mirror, ensuring his hair was neat and moisturized, shaping it with the same careful dedication he gave his studies. It was never about fashion alone. It was about culture, about belonging, about identity. This morning, he took extra care. He picked up the small jar of shea butter his grandmother had given him and warmed it between his hands before gently smoothing it through each lock. The scent reminded him of her warm, grounding, a quiet strength. He checked the mirror one last time and smiled. His crown was flawless. He slipped into his best outfit: crisp white shirt, navy blazer, and polished shoes. Nothing too flashy, but sharp enough to show respect for the opportunity. He looked older than 17, mature, confident. As he packed his debate notes into his leather satchel, he paused, staring at them for a moment. The topic for the competition was written on the first page: Equality in America. Progress or illusion. Elias had spent weeks preparing to argue both sides, but deep down he knew his truth progress was real. Yes, but illusion lived everywhere. His very life was proof of both. He had access to opportunities his ancestors could never have imagined. Yet he also knew how quickly prejudice could appear, how thin the line was between pride and humiliation. He shook the thought away. Today was not the day to dwell on fear. Today was a day for celebration, for reward. Downstairs, his grandmother was already bustling in the kitchen. The smell of fried plantains and eggs filled the air, and Elias felt his stomach growl. "Morning, my king," Ruth said, her voice warm and steady. She looked at him with eyes that carried generations of wisdom. "You ready to fly?" "Yes, Grandma," Elias said, kissing her cheek. "Dad called. We prayed." Ruth nodded approvingly. "Good. And your crown, let me see." Elias leaned down, and she inspected his dreadlocks carefully, smoothing one with her hand. "Perfect," she whispered. "Don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise." The words sat heavy in his heart, though he didn't know why. Breakfast was quick, but filled with quiet joy. Ruth teased him about how serious he looked, reminding him to smile. Elias promised he would. As he loaded his suitcase into the back of the rideshare car, he felt a rush of excitement. He pulled out his business-class boarding pass from his pocket and stared at it like it was gold. His father's words echoed in his mind. "This is not just a seat, son. This is proof that hard work opens doors." The airport was bustling when he arrived. Families waved goodbye at the curb. Businessmen hurried with rolling suitcases. Children clutched stuffed animals. Elias moved with purpose through the crowd, clutching his satchel tightly. At the security checkpoint, the officer barely glanced at him before waving him through. Smooth, efficient. Elias felt his nerves settle. Maybe this would all go just as planned. At the gate, he found a seat near the large windows overlooking the runway. He watched planes rise into the sky, each one a reminder of the journey ahead. For a moment, he allowed himself to dream not just of the debate, but of college, of law school, of standing in courtrooms one day fighting for justice. He took out his notebook and began reviewing his opening statement for the competition, but his attention kept drifting back to his boarding pass. Business class. Oh, seat 4A. The thought made him smile again. He imagined calling his father once he was settled in his seat, showing him the wide leather chair, the menu, the space. His father's pride would make it all worth it. Little did Elias know, within hours, his pride would be replaced by humiliation, and his father's calm voice would turn into a weapon that shook the foundations of the airline industry. But for now, as the gate agent announced the first call for boarding, Elias Johnson straightened his blazer, adjusted his satchel strap, and whispered to himself, "You belong here." He believed it, with all his heart. The hum of conversation filled the terminal as Elias stood up when the first boarding announcement echoed across the gate. Passengers stirred, gathering their bags and checking their phones, the collective anticipation of travel vibrating in the air. Elias adjusted his blazer, straightened his satchel strap, and clutched his business class ticket as though it were a key to a new world. The gate area was crowded, a mix of suited executives, retirees with wide-brimmed hats, families corralling restless children, and students like him, though most of them were tucked away in economy. He walked toward the line marked business class, his chest rising with pride. For a fleeting moment, he imagined his father's smile, the nod of approval that always made him feel stronger. Elias noticed some eyes following him. A middle-aged man in a gray suit frowned, then quickly turned away. A woman whispered something to her husband, their eyes darting toward his dreadlocks before shifting to the floor. Elias knew that look. He had seen it before in grocery stores, in lobbies, in places where people silently measured him, not by his grades or his manners, but by his skin and his crown. He tried to ignore it, repeating to himself, "You belong here, at the front of the line." The gate agent smiled warmly and scanned his ticket. The beep of approval sounded, and she handed it back with a cheerful, "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Johnson." Elias nodded, his heart lifting, smooth, easy. For once, no raised eyebrows, no extra questions, no suspicion. He walked down the jet bridge, the air cooler, the faint smell of metal and jet fuel seeping through the walls. Each step felt like progress, like crossing into a space that was his by right. As he stepped into the cabin, the mood shifted. The business class section was a world of wide leather seats, soft lighting, and calm order. Passengers settled in, already unwrapping headphones or sipping sparkling water. Elias breathed deeply, savoring it. That was when he met the eyes of Rebecca Collins. She stood near row 3, arms folded, her navy uniform pressed to perfection, blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. She smiled politely at a white couple as they stowed their bags overhead. But when her gaze shifted to Elias, the smile faded. Her eyes traveled from his blazer down to his polished shoes, then fixed on his dreadlocks with a cold precision that made his skin prickle. "May I see your boarding pass?" she asked, her voice clipped, sharp enough to cut glass. Elias blinked, surprised. He had just shown it at the gate, but he offered it anyway with a polite, "Yes, ma'am." Rebecca glanced at the pass, then at him, then back at the pass, as though searching for a mistake. "Seat 4A, she said flatly, her tone unreadable. "Yes, ma'am," Elias repeated, forcing a calm smile. Rebecca handed the ticket back slowly, her eyes narrowing. "All right, this way." She gestured toward the seat with a stiffness that felt more like dismissal than assistance. Elias slid into 4A, his heart still fluttering with excitement, but now mixed with unease. He tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe her tone meant nothing. Still, he felt her eyes linger as he settled his bag under the seat. The passenger beside him, an older white man with rimmed glasses and a Wall Street Journal folded in his lap, gave him a curt nod, but nothing more. Elias nodded back politely, then focused on the seat in front of him. The screen flickered with a welcome message, and for a moment, he allowed himself to relax again. He imagined texting his father made it to 4A. "Dad, it's amazing." He almost reached for his phone. But then Rebecca appeared again, stopping beside his row. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying that same sharp edge. "Can you sit up straight for me a moment?" Elias blinked, confused. He was sitting perfectly fine, his seatbelt fastened. Yes, ma'am." He straightened, her eyes locked on his hair. "Your hairstyle," she said carefully, as though selecting each word like ammunition. "It doesn't quite meet the standards we expect in our premium cabin." Elias froze. For a second, he wasn't even sure he heard her correctly. His heartbeat thudded in his ears. "I'm sorry," he asked softly. Rebecca leaned closer, her tone lowering but still firm. "Our grooming standards are very clear. We expect business-class passengers to maintain a professional appearance. That," she gestured toward his crown with a flick of her hand, "is not considered professional." The words hit Elias like ice water poured over his head. He felt his stomach twist. He had spent hours perfecting his locks that morning, smoothing them, moisturizing them, shaping them with care. His grandmother had blessed them before he left. His father had prayed over them. And now, in front of strangers, this woman had reduced them to something unworthy. "I don't understand," Elias said, his voice shaking despite his effort to stay composed. "My hair is clean. It's neat." "What's wrong with it?" Rebecca's expression remained cold. "It's not about hygiene. It's about standards. Business class represents our brand. We expect passengers to project a certain image." The man beside Elias shifted uncomfortably, pretending to read his newspaper. A woman across the aisle looked up from her tablet, frowning but saying nothing. Elias felt the weight of their silence pressing on him, their eyes watching but not intervening. He wanted to disappear. His chest tightened, his throat burned. He thought of his father's words that morning. "Your crown is already perfect," and suddenly they felt like a fragile shield being shattered. "I have a valid ticket," Elias whispered, more to himself than to her. Rebecca smiled thinly. "And you'll keep it, as long as you adjust your appearance to meet expectations." She straightened, smoothing her uniform as though the conversation were over. "We'll discuss it further before takeoff," she said briskly, then moved down the aisle to greet another passenger. Elias sat frozen, his hands trembling in his lap. His mind swirled. Should he protest? Should he call for a supervisor? Should he text his father right now? Or should he stay silent, endure the humiliation, and just get through the flight? The questions tore at him. His stomach churned. For the first time that day, his pride gave way to dread. He thought of Grandma Ruth's voice. "Don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise." But Rebecca's words had already dug into him like thorns. He reached for his phone, hesitated, then locked the screen again. His father was likely in a meeting. He didn't want to sound weak. He didn't want to ruin the gift by complaining before the plane even left the ground. Still, deep inside, fear crept in. What if she actually tried something? What if she made him leave the plane? The thought made his throat tighten. The intercom chimed. A cheerful voice welcomed passengers aboard, announcing the flight's destination and expected travel time. People relaxed into their seats, but Elias sat rigid, staring out the window at the runway, his reflection faintly visible against the glass. He whispered again, trying to convince himself, "You belong here." But this time, the words didn't feel quite as strong, and just a few rows behind. Rebecca Collins watched him carefully, her mind already made up about what she planned to do before the plane reached 30,000 feet. Elias shifted in his seat, trying to shake off the sting of Rebecca Collins' words, but they clung to him like a shadow. He glanced around the cabin. Yeah, the other passengers were already slipping into the rhythm of air travel, buckling belts, stowing bags, tapping on phones. For them, this was routine. For him, it was supposed to be extraordinary, a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Instead, the moment had soured before it even began. He pulled his debate notes from his satchel, flipping through the neatly highlighted pages, trying to focus on something within his control. Equality in America, progress or illusion. The irony gnawed at him. He had prepared to speak about illusions of fairness, about subtle forms of bias. Yet here he was, living the very argument before he even stepped on stage. His stomach twisted, but he forced himself to read the lines he had written. Across the aisle, a woman adjusted her scarf and shot him a sympathetic glance before quickly turning back to her book. He wasn't sure if she felt sorry for him or was simply uncomfortable being in the middle of something she didn't want to acknowledge. That was often the way of it, people saw, but rarely spoke. The older man beside him folded his newspaper and placed it carefully in the seat pocket. "Traveling for school?" he asked suddenly, his tone polite but guarded. Elias looked up, startled. "Yes, sir. Debate competition in Boston." The man nodded once, neither warm nor unfriendly, simply neutral. "Good luck," he said, then closed his eyes as though ending the conversation. Elias whispered a quiet thank you, but the words felt small. He wondered if the man had overheard Rebecca's remark about grooming standards. He wondered if the man agreed, silently judging, or if he disagreed but lacked the courage to say so. Rebecca returned, her heels clicking softly against the carpeted aisle. She leaned toward a couple in row 2, smiling warmly, asking if they needed assistance. Her demeanor was professional, almost gentle. Then she turned toward Elias's row, and the warmth drained from her face. "I'll need to check with my supervisor before we close the cabin doors," she said, her voice low but firm, meant for him alone. "We'll have to address your appearance before we depart." Elias swallowed hard, his palms damp. "I have a valid ticket," he repeated, though his voice cracked. Rebecca's lips curved into something between a smirk and a smile. "We'll see," she replied, then walked away. Elias sat frozen. The words rang in his ears. "We'll see." His heart raced. Was she bluffing? Did she actually have the authority to deny him he had flown before, though always in economy, and never had anyone questioned his hair, his appearance, his worthiness to sit in a seat he had rightfully paid for? He considered pulling out his phone, calling his father. But his father was a busy man, deep in meetings, carrying the weight of investors and clients. Elias didn't want to sound like a child incapable of handling himself. He wanted to be strong, independent, someone his father could be proud of. Yet beneath that thought was another, heavier one. Maybe this was too big for him to handle alone. The boarding announcement chimed again. The last passengers filed in. The overhead bin slammed shut. A young mother with a toddler hurried past, apologizing softly as she squeezed into her seat in economy. Elias watched her, envying the simplicity of her concern, just getting her child settled. His own concern was heavier, sharper, something he couldn't voice without risking further humiliation. Rebecca moved through the cabin with an air of control, nodding at colleagues, checking seat belts, offering polite smiles, but each time her gaze flicked toward him, Elias felt pinned, like prey under the eyes of a predator. His thoughts spiraled. Should he confront her directly? Should he demand to see the written policy she claimed existed? His father had taught him to stand up for himself, to challenge injustice, but he had also taught him to pick his battles wisely. Which was this a skirmish he should fight now, or a storm to weather quietly until he landed safely? The engines roared to life, a deep vibration running through the cabin. The captain's voice filled the air, calm and steady, welcoming passengers, noting the clear skies ahead. Applause rippled softly through the cabin, a tradition among some travelers. Elias clapped once, then stopped, feeling awkward when no one nearby joined in. Rebecca leaned against the galley wall, watching him. She whispered something to another attendant, who glanced his way, then quickly looked back. Elias's chest tightened. They were talking about him. He reached into his satchel and pulled out the small jar of shea butter his grandmother had given him, almost as a reflex. He held it in his hand, turning it over, remembering her words that morning. Don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise. The jar was nearly empty, the label worn, but it smelled of home, of safety, of dignity. He slipped it back inside the bag, closing his eyes. Everything all right, young man? The question came from the woman across the aisle, her voice quiet but kind. She wore a tailored suit, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes sharp with awareness. Elias hesitated, then nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. She studied him for a moment, as though she knew the answer wasn't true, but she didn't press. She gave him a small smile, then returned to her tablet. That tiny act of acknowledgement, though fleeting, steadied him just a little. The plane began to taxi, the gentle lurch forward pressing him into his seat. Elias gripped the armrest, forcing his breathing to match the rhythm of the wheels rolling down the runway. But even as the plane lifted into the air, as the ground fell away and the city shrank beneath them, the weight of Rebecca's words didn't loosen. He could feel them coiled in the air, waiting, a storm brewing in the silence of the cabin. He thought of calling his grandmother. He could picture her face, lined with years of wisdom, her hands steady as she braided and twisted his hair. He could almost hear her voice. Baby, your crown is yours, not theirs. Don't let them take it. He wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe he was strong enough to hold on to it. But as Rebecca passed by again, her eyes sharp, her lips pressed thin, Elias felt that fragile shield begin to crack. This was supposed to be the proudest flight of his young life. Instead, tension sat heavy in his chest, a storm gathering at 30,000 feet, ready to break at any moment. And he had no idea just how violent that storm would become. The seatbelt sign flickered on as the plane climbed into the clouds. The soft ding echoed through the cabin, and passengers settled deeper into their seats. Elias tried to do the same, focusing on the hum of the engines, the vibration beneath his feet, the way the earth slowly disappeared below them. For a moment, he tried to convince himself that everything would be fine, that Rebecca Collins had spoken her piece and moved on. Maybe once the flight was underway, she would leave him alone. But the reprieve was brief. As the attendants began their routine checks, Rebecca moved down the aisle with deliberate steps. She stopped at Elias's row, her posture rigid, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her eyes scanned him from head to toe, and then landed on his dreadlocks with visible disdain. "Mr. Johnson," she said, in a voice meant to sound official, though it carried more judgment than authority. "We need to revisit the issue of your grooming standards." Elias's throat tightened. He looked up at her, feeling every pair of eyes in the nearby rows shift toward him. Some passengers glanced quickly before pretending to look away, but he could feel their attention, the heavy silence pressing on him. "My grooming standards?" he asked carefully. Though his voice wavered, Rebecca nodded sharply. Business class passengers are expected to maintain a professional image that aligns with the environment we uphold. Your current hairstyle does not meet those expectations. The words landed like stones. Elias could hardly believe what he was hearing. He wanted to argue, to shout, to demand proof, but instead, he sat frozen, his heart hammering, his palms slick with sweat. "My hair is clean," he whispered. "It's neat. My grandmother helped me take care of it this morning." "What about it isn't professional?" Rebecca's lips pursed. "It's not a matter of hygiene. It's a matter of image. Business class is designed to represent professionalism and refinement. Certain appearances can be distracting or inconsistent with that environment." Her words sliced through him, vague and loaded, the kind of language people used when they wanted to discriminate without naming it. Elias felt his stomach knot. He thought of his grandmother's words just hours earlier. "Your crown is perfect. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." But here, thousands of feet in the air, that truth seemed fragile. He glanced around, searching for support. The older man beside him kept his eyes shut tight, feigning sleep. The woman across the aisle looked uncomfortable, shifting in her seat, but said nothing. A young couple a few rows ahead whispered to each other, their eyes darting back toward him. Nobody intervened. Nobody said a word. The silence cut deeper than Rebecca's accusations. It told him he was alone in this. Elias swallowed hard. Can I speak to a supervisor?" His voice cracked as he said it, his attempt at standing up for himself faltering under the weight of humiliation. Rebecca straightened her shoulders, her tone crisp. "I am the supervisor for this section of the cabin, and I am telling you, you need to address your appearance before this flight continues. Otherwise, we may need to reconsider your seat assignment." Her words sent a jolt of panic through him. Reconsider your seat assignment. Did that mean moving him back to economy, removing him from the plane altogether? The thought made his chest tighten until it hurt. He had earned this seat. His father had paid for this ticket as a reward for years of hard work. Was it all about to be stripped away because of his hair? Rebecca leaned closer, lowering her voice. "We have grooming scissors in the service kit. I can help you tidy this up so it looks more appropriate. If you cooperate, we won't have a problem." Elias' blood ran cold. "Scissors." The word reverberated in his head like a threat. He felt his breath catch, his throat dry. He shook his head, barely able to speak. "No, please. My hair is my identity." "You can't," Rebecca interrupted sharply. "You need to make a choice. Mr. Johnson, either you allow me to adjust it so that it meets standards, or you'll need to be reseated. Those are your options." Elias sat in stunned silence. His hands trembled in his lap. He wanted to scream that this was wrong, illegal, abusive, but the words caught in his throat. He was 17, surrounded by strangers, with a woman in uniform telling him he didn't belong unless he changed who he was. He reached for his phone, fumbling with shaky hands. He dialed his father's number, praying he would pick up. The call went to voicemail. His father was likely in a meeting, unaware that his son was being humiliated 30,000 feet above the ground. "Dad, please," Elias whispered into the phone before the beep, his voice breaking. "She says I can't sit here with my hair. She wants to cut it. Please answer." He ended the call, his vision blurred with tears he refused to let fall. Desperate. He scrolled to another number and pressed call. His grandmother. The sound of her voice filled his ear almost instantly. Calm and fierce all at once. "Elias, baby." "What's wrong?" His voice cracked as he whispered, trying not to draw more attention. "Grandma, she says I can't stay in this seat with my hair. She wants to cut it with scissors. What do I do?" There was a pause, and then Ruth's voice, steady as stone. "You don't let anyone touch your crown. Elias, not ever. That hair is yours. It's our family's pride. You hear me? You stay strong. I'm calling your father right now. He'll fix this." Her words gave him a flicker of strength, but Rebecca was still standing over him, scissors glinting in her hand now as she pulled them from the service kit. Elias's chest tightened, his breath shallow. He whispered, "Grandma, please hurry." Rebecca's tone softened, dripping with false patience. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Let me just trim it up a bit. You'll still be able to fly, and it will look more appropriate." But Elias knew this wasn't about appropriateness. It was about power, about control, about forcing him to strip away his identity so she could feel superior. The realization stung like acid. He could feel the eyes of passengers around him, their silence complicit, their discomfort heavy in the air. He thought again of his debate notes, the words he had written about illusions of equality. He had planned to argue them on stage, in front of judges and peers. Now, he was living them in a cabin full of strangers, too afraid to speak. As the first strands of fear clamped around his chest, Elias realized he was caught between choices that weren't really choices at all. Surrender his dignity or lose the seat he had earned. His hands trembled as he whispered to himself again, "You belong here." But for the first time, he didn't believe it. Oh, and Rebecca Collins, standing with scissors ready, was determined to make sure he never did. The hum of the engine seemed to vanish under the weight of silence pressing on Elias's shoulders. Rebecca Collins stood over him, the small pair of silver scissors glinting under the cabin lights. Passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably, some turning their faces toward the window, others lowering their eyes to their screens. A few, phones in hand, subtly angled their cameras to capture what was unfolding. Elias sat stiff in his seat, heart racing so violently he thought it might burst from his chest. His hands gripped the armrests until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to scream that this was wrong, to call out for justice, but his voice felt buried under the heaviness of shame. "Last chance, Mr. Johnson," Rebecca said, her tone calm but laced with menace. "Either we correct this issue now, or I'll be forced to ask you to leave your seat. You wouldn't want to be escorted back to economy, would you?" Her words twisted like a knife. Economy. As though that's where he truly belonged. No matter how hard he worked, no matter the ticket in his hand. "I don't want to move," Elias whispered, his throat burning. "This is my seat. I paid for it." Rebecca's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Then we'll do what's necessary to ensure you're presentable." She leaned closer, scissors poised. Elias jerked back, his body pressing against the window as though he could disappear into it. "Please don't," he begged, his voice breaking. "Please, you don't understand." But she didn't hesitate. With a swift, merciless snip, she grabbed the first lock near his temple and sliced through. The sound was soft, metallic, but to Elias it was deafening. He felt the weight of the strand fall against his shoulder, then slip onto the cabin floor. A gasp rippled through the rows around him. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" Another passenger raised their phone higher, recording every second. Elias's eyes blurred with tears as shock froze him in place. He reached up instinctively, his fingers brushing the uneven edge where his hair had been severed. It felt unreal, like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. Rebecca didn't pause. With practiced efficiency, she snipped again, and another thick lock tumbled onto his lap. Then another. Each cut felt like a blow, each fallen strand like a piece of his soul ripped away. Elias wanted to shout, to swat her hand away, to stand and fight, but he was paralyzed. 17 years old, surrounded by strangers, targeted by an authority figure in uniform, his dignity unraveling with every cut. His mind screamed for his father, for his grandmother, for anyone to stop this. But the silence around him was crushing. The woman across the aisle pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide, yet she didn't move. The man beside him stared fixedly at his folded newspaper, as if it could shield him from complicity. A voice whispered in Elias's head, "This is the illusion you wrote about. Equality that vanishes when tested. Progress that collapses under silence." Snip! Another lock fell. The humiliation was unbearable. He felt tears stream down his cheeks, hot and unstoppable. But even they didn't slow her hand. Rebecca's face remained impassive, as if she were tidying a mess instead of dismantling a boy's pride. "This is for your own good," she muttered under her breath, though the satisfaction in her eyes betrayed the cruelty beneath her words. "Now you'll look appropriate." The words shattered something inside him. Appropriate, as though his heritage, his identity, his crown had been inappropriate all along. He thought of his grandmother's hands gently twisting each strand, of her voice whispering history into his hair. He thought of his father's prayer that morning, calling his crown perfect. He thought of the pride he had felt just hours earlier, boarding with his ticket like a trophy. And then he thought of what remained now, uneven tufts, jagged patches, scalp exposed where locks had once cascaded. A boy stripped of his dignity before the eyes of a silent cabin. The final snip came with cruel finality. Rebecca stepped back, her scissors glinting, her lips curved in satisfaction. She surveyed her work like an artist admiring a canvas. "There," she said, her voice loud enough for others to hear, "much more professional. Now you're fit to remain in this cabin." The humiliation burned through Elias's chest. His reflection in the darkened window revealed the damaged chopped hair, broken symmetry, the crown that had taken years to build reduced to ruins in minutes. He looked like a victim of violence, not a young man prepared for excellence. Tears streamed freely now. He tried to wipe them away with the back of his hand, but they kept falling. His throat ached with the sobs he tried to swallow, and still, the silence of the passengers cut the deepest. A few shifted uncomfortably, some whispering to each other, but no one intervened. No one stood. They watched, recording, observing, but not protecting. Then, from the back of the cabin, a voice rang out, sharp and furious, slicing through the silence like thunder. "What the hell's wrong with you?" Every head turned. A woman stood in the aisle, tall and commanding, her scrubs wrinkled from travel, but her presence unshakable. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had seen too much suffering to let this stand. Monica Harris, a nurse returning home after a medical conference, glared at Rebecca with eyes blazing. "You just assaulted a child," she said. her voice trembling with outrage. "You cut his hair without consent." "Who gave you the right to touch him?" Rebecca stiffened, trying to maintain her composure. "Ma'am, please sit down. This doesn't concern you. I was enforcing company policy." "Company policy." Monica's voice rose higher, fueled by fury. "Show me where it says you can assault a passenger. Show me where it says you can humiliate a young black man for his hair. Show me that policy right now." Gas spread through the cabin. Phones that had been quietly recording were now raised boldly, capturing Monica's words, capturing Rebecca's stunned expression. "This boy's hair is his heritage, his identity," Monica continued, her voice quivering with passion. "You had no right to cut it, no right to strip him of his dignity. You didn't enforce a policy, you committed violence." Rebecca's composure faltered. "If you don't calm down, I'll have security waiting for you when we land." Monica laughed bitterly, her anger too strong to be silenced. "Good. Let them meet me at the gate, because I want the whole world to see what you just did." She turned toward Elias, her expression softening. "Baby, you're beautiful. Your hair was perfect before she touched it. Don't you ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Elias's tears spilled harder at her words. For the first time since the first cut, he felt seen, protected. The cabin erupted in murmurs. Some passengers applauded quietly. Others still looked away, unwilling to face the storm. But Monica Harris had shattered the silence, and with it, the illusion of Rebecca's authority. Rebecca opened her mouth to retort, but Monica stepped closer, her palm flying before she could stop herself. The slap cracked through the cabin like lightning. Rebecca staggered back, clutching her cheek, stunned. Gasps and shouts filled the air. It was a moment that would soon be replayed on millions of screens across the world, the slap heard at 30,000 feet. Elias stared, stunned, his breath catching. For the first time since the ordeal began, he felt the tide shift. Someone had stood up. Someone had said no more. And though the scars on his crown were still raw, in that moment, Elias realized something powerful. He was not alone. For a long moment after the slap, the cabin froze. The only sounds were the low rumble of the engines and the faint chime of someone's phone recording in the background. Rebecca Collins stood frozen, one hand pressed to her stinging cheek, her face twisted in shock. Monica Harris stood tall, her chest rising and falling, eyes burning with righteous fury. Elias sat motionless in his seat, tears streaking his face, his crown scattered in locks across the carpet. He looked up at Monica as though she had descended from the heavens themselves, a guardian appearing just when hope had collapsed. His chest heaved with shallow breaths, shame mixing with an overwhelming gratitude he could not yet voice. Passengers finally stirred. A murmur spread, hushed at first, then louder, like waves rolling through the cabin. Some gasped, others whispered, but many pulled out their phones, raising them boldly now. The glow of cameras lit the aisle as passengers documented everything. This was no longer a quiet humiliation. This was a spectacle, a reckoning in real time. Rebecca's lips trembled before she found her voice. "You," she stammered, pointing at Monica. "You just assaulted a flight attendant. You'll be arrested the moment we land." Monica did not flinch. She took a step closer, her voice steady and strong. "Arrest me. Do it, because the world will see what you did first. You assaulted a child. You cut his hair without his consent. You humiliated him in front of everyone here. And every single person in this cabin has it on video." Her words rang through the air like a gavel striking wood. Rebecca faltered, her authority slipping like sand through her fingers. She glanced at her fellow attendants. seeking backup, but none stepped forward. One looked away, pretending to busy herself with the beverage cart. Another shifted nervously, unwilling to touch the fire now burning in the aisle. Monica turned her attention back to Elias, her tone softening. "Sweetheart, you're okay. You're strong. Don't let her make you feel small. What she did says nothing about you. It says everything about her." Elias tried to speak, his lips trembling, but only a broken whisper escaped. She cut it all. His fingers grazed the jagged tufts left on his scalp, and another wove of tears filled his eyes. "I know," Monica said, kneeling slightly to meet his gaze, "but your crown isn't gone. It's still yours, and it will grow back stronger. She can't take away what it means." The woman across the aisle finally spoke, her voice quivering. "She's right. This is wrong. He's just a boy." Others murmured in agreement. The silence that had suffocated Elias earlier was breaking. A ripple of courage spread, slow but undeniable. Rebecca, realizing her grip on the situation was unraveling, snapped. "Everyone calm down. This is an official matter of airline policy. Sit down and remain quiet." But her words no longer carried weight. The authority she had wielded like a weapon was crumbling under the weight of witnesses who had finally found their voices. "From the back of the cabin," a man shouted. "That's not policy, that's abuse." Another added, "We paid for these tickets, and we're not letting you treat passengers like this." The atmosphere shifted, the tide turning against Rebecca. Elias's phone buzzed in his trembling hands. He glanced down, barely able to see through his tears. A call from Grandma Ruth. He answered quickly, voice shaking. "Grandma baby, are you all right?" Her voice came through fierce and protective, though Elias could hear the tremor of heartbreak beneath it. "They cut my hair," Elias choked out, his words strangled with sobs. "She said it wasn't professional. She used scissors. Everyone saw." A silence fell on the other end before Ruth's voice hardened with steel. "Put Monica on the phone." Elias handed the phone to Monica, who took it without hesitation. "Yes, ma'am," she said quickly. "This is Elias's grandmother," Ruth said, her tone sharp. "Tell my grandson to stay strong. I'm calling his father right now. That woman won't get away with this." Monica glanced at Elias, her eyes softening. "He's holding on, ma'am. Don't you worry. Nobody's touching him again while I'm here." "Good," Ruth said, her voice firm, "because his daddy's about to move mountains." Monica returned the phone to Elias, who clutched it like a lifeline. Meanwhile, Rebecca, still reeling from the slap, hissed at Monica, "You've ruined everything. Do you know who you're dealing with?" Monica's eyes narrowed. "No, do you?" Because at that very moment, hundreds of miles away in Chicago, Ruth's call pierced the world of David Johnson like thunder. He was just leaving a boardroom, phone in hand, his mind full of numbers and contracts. But when he heard his mother-in-law's trembling voice, the corporate mask dropped instantly. They heard him. "David," Ruth said, her words breaking. "That flight attendant. She cut his dreadlocks. In front of everyone. She said he wasn't professional enough for business class. David, our baby's crying. He's broken." The world seemed to tilt around him. David gripped the phone tighter, his vision tunneling. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The air felt too thin, his heart pounding with a rage so pure it steadied him into deadly calm. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice low, trembling with fury. "She cut his hair," Ruth repeated, her voice rising. "With scissors. in front of the whole plane. They humiliated him. David's jaw clenched. His voice dropped lower, sharper. Put Elias on the phone. Moments later, his son's face filled the screen in a shaky video call. Elias's eyes were red, his cheeks wet, his crown butchered. David felt his chest shatter at the sight. "Dad," Elias sobbed, his voice broken. She said, "I didn't belong here." She cut it. "She cut my crown." David swallowed hard, rage boiling in his veins. But when he spoke, his voice was steady, like iron forged in fire. "Listen to me, son. Look at me." Elias lifted his gaze, trembling. "There's nothing wrong with you," David said, each word deliberate. "Your crown was beautiful. What she did was not policy. It was a crime. And she's about to learn what happens when you touch my child." Elias nodded weakly, his chest heaving. "Stay strong," David said, his eyes blazing with fury. "You're safe now. I promise you, you're safe, because I'm about to bring down everything she hides behind." The call ended, and David Johnson transformed from a grieving father to a force of devastation. He opened his contacts. His fingers didn't tremble. They were steady, precise. First, the CEO of the airline, then the head of the FAA, then his attorney, then an investigative journalist. One by one, the calls began, each word like a hammer, each demand like a detonator. The storm had begun. Back in the cabin, Rebecca tried to regain control, barking orders for everyone to sit down and stay calm. But Monica stood firm, arms crossed, glaring at her like an immovable wall. "You may wear a uniform," Monica said loudly enough for the whole cabin to hear, "but you don't get to decide who belongs. Not today, not ever again." Applause broke out, tentative at first, then stronger. Passengers clapped, cheered, some shouting words of support. Rebecca's face turned pale, her authority crumbling with every beat of those hands. Elias sat in his seat, broken but not destroyed, because now he knew the silence had been broken. His grandmother's fire, Monica's courage, and his father's fury were converging. And soon, the woman who had cut his crown would realize she hadn't just humiliated a boy. She had awakened a reckoning that would shake an entire industry. David Johnson moved like a man possessed, though every motion was measured. He strode through the glass doors of the hotel lobby where his board meeting had just ended. His phone pressed tight against his ear. The sharp rhythm of his shoes echoed across the marble floor as he dialed number after number, his fury channeling into strategy. His first call was to Evelyn Marks, CEO of Skyline Airways, the company whose colors Rebecca Collins was wearing when she humiliated his son. Evelyn picked up quickly, her polished tone carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to control. "David," she said warmly, "what a surprise. Are you still in Chicago?" "Your employee just assaulted my son," David said, his voice flat, controlled, lethal. "On flight 627 out of New York. She cut his hair with scissors. He is 17. Passengers have it on video. It's already online. You have exactly 6 minutes to fire her and issue a public apology before I burn your airline to the ground." There was silence. David imagined Evelyn blinking, calculating, realizing this was not a routine call. That can't be accurate. We have no policy about 6 minutes. David cut in, his voice like a blade. Your stock will tank. Your sponsors will pull out. Your investors will flee. And I will make sure this story dominates every screen in America by the time your office is open tomorrow. Do not test me. Evelyn. He ended the call before she could respond. Already his fingers were moving again. Second call. The Federal Aviation Administration. The voice of Director Harold Bates came through, cautious but familiar. "David," Bates said, "to what do I owe?" "My son was assaulted on one of your regulated flights," David snapped. "A flight attendant cut his hair, humiliated him in front of a cabin full of witnesses. I'm sending you video proof right now. If federal charges aren't filed within 24 hours, you'll be answering questions before Congress about why your agency protects criminals instead of passengers. David, these things take time." "Not this time," David said coldly. "Not when it's my son." He hung up. His rage was steady now, sharpened into precision. Third call. His attorney, Marcus Lee, a civil rights powerhouse with a reputation for gutting corporations that crossed the line. "Marcus," David said, his voice low. "File everything. Civil rights violations, assault of a minor, emotional distress, federal hate crime statutes. I want it on every desk in the Southern District by morning. And make it big. Big enough to send a message that no airline will ever dare try this again." Marcus's reply was immediate. "Consider it done. This will be the largest discrimination suit aviation has ever seen." Fourth call. Patricia Lane, a senior investigative journalist at the New York Globe, known for exposing corruption. "Patricia," David said, skipping pleasantries, "I have video footage of a flight attendant assaulting a black teenager on a business class flight. That teenager is my son. This isn't just a story. It's a cultural earthquake. I want you on it tonight." Her voice sharpened. "Send it. We'll run it." Fifth call. His partner at the investment firm, Michael Connors. "Dump every share we have in Skyline Airways." David ordered. "Then short them to the floor. Call every institutional investor you know and tell them the airline is about to bleed. By tomorrow. I want their stock in free fall." His voice was calm, but each word was an act of war. Back in the plane, the war was already underway. Rebecca Collins stood pale, her cheeks still red from Monica's slap. She tried to reassert herself, barking orders for passengers to sit down, to put phones away, but the spell of her authority was broken. Passengers were openly filming, whispering in anger, some muttering words like disgraceful and unacceptable. Monica Harris remained planted in the aisle, her arms crossed. Her eyes followed Rebecca like a hawk tracking prey. "Touch that boy again," she warned, "and I promise you'll regret it more than you already do." Elias sat slumped in his seat, his chest tight with humiliation. He touched his butchered hair, his fingertips grazing the uneven patches. Each touch was a reminder of what had been stolen from him: his crown, his pride, his identity all cut away in minutes. The phone call with his father replayed in his head, his dad's voice steady, promising vengeance. He wanted to believe it. He wanted to feel the strength in his father's words. But right now, sitting beneath the stares of strangers, he felt small, broken, and exposed. His mind twisted with doubt. Maybe Rebecca was right. Maybe he didn't belong here. Maybe all his hard work, his perfect SAT scores, his debate victories, it didn't matter. Maybe in their eyes, he would always be a boy with hair that didn't fit. Tears welled again, but he clenched his fists, forcing them back. He heard his grandmother's voice, strong and unyielding. "Don't let anyone touch your crown." He whispered it to himself like a prayer. Monica noticed his trembling hands. She leaned close, her voice softer now. "Don't you believe a word of what she said? Your hair was beautiful. It was a crown. Baby, nothing she did changes that." Elias's lips quivered, but everyone saw. They saw her shame. "Not yours," Monica said firmly. They saw cruelty, and they saw you endure it with strength. That's what they'll remember. Elias closed his eyes, breathing her words in like oxygen. Rebecca, desperate to salvage control, reached for the intercom. Her voice echoed through the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are addressing an issue of passenger conduct. Everything is under control. The words rang hollow. From the rows behind, someone called out, "The only conduct issue here is you." Another voice followed. "We're watching, and we won't forget this." Applause broke out, scattered but growing. Rebecca's face flushed. For the first time in 12 years of flying, she was no longer in control. At that same moment, in her Manhattan office, CEO Evelyn Marks stared at her phone. The footage David had warned about was already climbing across social media platforms. Hashtags multiplying #hands off his crown, #justice for Elias, #skyline shame. She had 6 minutes. She knew he wasn't bluffing. On the plane, Elias sat taller in his seat, the words of Monica and the distant fury of his father flowing through him like a current. His humiliation hadn't vanished, but beneath it, something new stirred a fragile strength, a quiet defiance. Rebecca turned toward him, scissors still clutched in her trembling hand. But now, Elias met her gaze directly, his tear-streaked face unflinching. For the first time, she looked away. The power had shifted. By the time the plane cut through its smooth path above the Atlantic, the story was already roaring across the world. It started small passengers uploading shaky footage to Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, clips of Rebecca Collins snipping through Elias's locks, his tears spilling silently, Monica Harris rising to his defense. The slap echoed through screens, sharp and undeniable, followed by Monica's furious words, "You assaulted a child." Within minutes, hashtags ignited like wildfire. #justice. Elias surged to the top of Twitter. #hands off his crown trended across Instagram, paired with photos of men, women, and children proudly showing their natural hair. TikTok flooded with reaction videos. Tears, outrage, solidarity. The slap itself became a cultural symbol, remixed with music, slowed down into cinematic edits, captioned with words like protection, dignity, and power. In the Manhattan office of Skyline Airways, CEO Evelyn Marks was drowning in crisis. Screens around her lit up with news outlets already replaying the footage. Anchors' voices echoed a shocking case of discrimination at 30,000 feet. A teenager humiliated, calls for accountability. Evelyn's staff scurried around her, fielding calls from investors, journalists, board members. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from David Johnson, 4 minutes left. She gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. She had known David for years, admired his business acumen, even feared his influence. Now she understood the full scope of his power. He wasn't bluffing. On the plane, Rebecca Collins' world was unraveling. She paced the aisle, her face tight with rage and embarrassment. The scissors still trembled in her hand, though she no longer wielded them with confidence. Every time she looked toward Elias, she saw phones pointed at her, passengers whispering, eyes burning with judgment. She approached the galley, hissing at another flight attendant. "Call the captain. Tell him I need security waiting when we land." The attendant shifted uncomfortably. "Rebecca, maybe we should just stop. This is getting out of control." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "Do as I say." Back in seat 3A. Elias sat hunched, staring at the scattered strands of his hair on the floor. The humiliation clung to him like a second skin. He felt raw, exposed, Yet beneath the pain, a strange calm had begun to take root. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "There is nothing wrong with you." His grandmother's words. "Don't let anyone touch your crown." Monica's fierce defense. "They saw her shame, not yours." He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, barely audible, "I belong here. I belong here." Monica noticed. She touched his arm gently, her voice low. "That's right, baby. You do belong. Don't let her break that truth." Passengers nearby leaned closer, murmuring soft words of support. "Stay strong, son. We've got your back." The silence that once suffocated him was shifting into solidarity. At that very moment, David Johnson's campaign of destruction was hitting full stride. In Washington, Senator Elaine Brooks, chair of the Senate Transportation Committee, stared at her inbox. David's email had arrived with video attachments and a simple subject line: "Hate crime on Skyline Airways Flight 627. Her phone rang before she finished the first clip. It was David himself. "Senator," he said, his tone calm but firm. "You've seen the video, I just opened it." "My God, David, this is systemic." He cut in, "and it ends now. I want hearings. I want legislation. The Crown Act on a federal level, tied to aviation non-discrimination, and I want it immediately." Senator Brooks hesitated, then said softly, "You'll have it." In Los Angeles, the NAACP legal team convened an emergency meeting. In Atlanta, civil rights leaders prepared statements of condemnation. In Chicago, David's firm executed trades that sent Skyline stock plunging 11% in the first hour of after-hours trading. By dawn, it would be in free fall. On TikTok, a video of Elias crying quietly in his seat had been viewed 3 million times. Comments flooded in. "This broke my heart. No child should endure this. Protect his crown." Strangers began donating to GoFundMe pages launched in his name, raising thousands within hours. But on the plane, the tension only deepened. Rebecca stormed back down the aisle, her voice sharp. "All recording devices must be put away immediately. This is a violation of federal law." Passengers ignored her. Some even laughed bitterly. "Federal law," a man in row 5 shot back. "What about assaulting a passenger? What law covers that?" Applause followed. Rebecca's face reddened. She spun toward Monica. "You will be detained the moment we land." Monica's gaze didn't waver. "Then I'll walk off that plane knowing I stood up for a child." "What will you walk off? With shame, a lawsuit? Maybe a jail sentence?" Gas rippled through the cabin. Someone shouted, "Say it louder." Another, "That's right." The applause grew. Rebecca's authority was collapsing in real time. Elias looked around, stunned. The same passengers who had once been silent were now emboldened. He wasn't alone anymore. The shame still burned, but in its shadow, a spark of dignity flickered. His phone buzzed again. A message from his father. "I'm coming for you. Stay strong." Elias clutched the phone, his chest swelling with fragile hope. The captain's voice broke over the intercom. Calm, steady, professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for your cooperation as we continue our flight. Please remain seated. We will be on the ground in approximately 2 hours." But beneath the calm, the storm was already raging. Security teams were being assembled at the arrival gate. Lawyers were drafting emergency filings. Politicians were crafting statements. Investors were dumping shares. And in seat 3A, a 17-year-old boy sat surrounded by fragments of his crown, his humiliation immortalized on millions of screens, but his story no longer just his own. He whispered again, stronger this time, "I belong here." Monica heard him and nodded. Yes, you do. And when this is over, the whole world will know it. Rebecca collapsed into her jump seat, shaking, her mind racing. For the first time, she realized she hadn't just cut a boy's hair. She had cut into something far larger than she could ever control, and the roar of justice was coming for her. The captain's calm voice faded into silence, but no one in the cabin believed his reassurances. The atmosphere was electric, thick with tension. The hum of the engine seemed louder, more ominous, as the plane began its slow descent toward the city skyline in the distance. Elias sat rigid, clutching his phone like it was a shield. He glanced at the reflection in the window, his crown butchered, scalp uneven and raw. His stomach twisted. He could imagine the headlines already. His humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was viral. Millions of eyes were watching, dissecting every detail. He wanted to disappear, but at the same time, something in him refused to shrink away. He whispered the words again under his breath, stronger this time. I belong here. Monica Harris squeezed his hand gently. That's it, baby. Keep saying it. Don't let her break you. Across the aisle. Rebecca Collins sat rigid in her jump seat, her jaw clenched. The sting of Monica's slap still throbbed against her cheek, a humiliation she couldn't mask. She muttered under her breath, rehearsing excuses, rationalizations, company policy, professional image, passenger conduct. But the words sounded hollow even to her. The eyes of the passengers burned holes through her, every one of them a silent jury. A ripple of voices rose in the cabin. Someone near the back whispered, I heard security's waiting at the gate. Another answered, for her, not him. Murmurs spread like wildfire. The crowd had chosen its side. Elias glanced at the strands of his hair still scattered on the floor. Each lock was a memory, years of patience, lessons from his grandmother, pride in his heritage, gone in minutes. His throat tightened. He felt shame clawing back, threatening to drown him again. But then his phone buzzed. It was a message from his father. Stay calm. I'm at the airport waiting. You are not alone. A surge of relief filled Elias's chest. His father wasn't just coming. He was already there, waiting with fire in his veins. Meanwhile, David Johnson stood at the arrivals terminal, phone pressed against his ear, eyes locked on the security checkpoint. His presence radiated authority, his tailored suit impeccable, but his face was hard as stone. The calls he'd made in the past 2 hours had already ignited a storm, lawsuits filed, hearings promised, sponsors fleeing Skyline Airways like rats from a sinking ship. But this wasn't about stock prices or politics anymore. This was about his son. His attorney, Marcus Lee, walked beside him, phone in hand, updating him in real time. We've already filed in federal court. Assault of a minor. Civil rights violations. By tomorrow morning, every network will be running this story wall to wall. David nodded once, his expression unchanging. Good. Make sure Rebecca Collins is charged personally, not just the airline. She will be, Marcus said firmly. David's phone buzzed again. Evelyn Marks, CEO of Skyline. He ignored it. She had already missed her chance to contain this. His ultimatum had passed, and now she was collateral damage. Back in the cabin, Rebecca tried one last time to salvage control. She stood, her voice sharp and strained. Passengers, I need your full cooperation upon landing. There will be federal officers boarding the plane. Anyone interfering will be subject to arrest. Her words were met with open hostility. A man in row 6 barked, Arrest you! You mean applause followed. louder this time. Phones angled higher, capturing her every flinch. Monica raised her voice, steady and defiant. Don't listen to her scare tactics. She's the one who'll answer for what she did. Not this boy. Not anyone else. Rebecca's cheeks burned as passengers clapped. Her authority, once absolute in these aisles, had been shattered. Elias leaned back, heart pounding. For the first time since the scissors touched his hair, he felt the tide had turned, but a gnawing fear lingered. What if the officers sided with Rebecca? What if they dragged him off the plane in handcuffs, the world mistaking him for the aggressor? His thoughts spiraled. He pictured headlines blaming him, trolls mocking him online. His stomach twisted so violently he thought he might be sick. Monica noticed the panic in his eyes. She leaned close, whispering, "Don't you worry. When those doors open, you'll see your father standing there. And trust me, the only person leaving this plane in handcuffs will be her." Elias swallowed hard, nodding, clinging to her words like a lifeline. The plane jolted slightly as it hit turbulence, the cabin lights flickering, gasps echoed. Rebecca steadied herself against a seat, but Monica didn't move. Her presence was an anchor in the storm. Minutes ticked by like hours. The descent continued, the city lights glowing brighter below. The tension grew unbearable. Finally, the intercom chimed. The captain's voice returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final approach. Please fasten your seatbelts." A hush fell over the cabin. Every passenger knew this landing wouldn't be ordinary. Elias gripped the armrests, his knuckles white. He whispered again, louder this time. "I belong here." Monica smiled faintly. "Yes, you do. Baby, don't ever forget it." The wheels screeched against the runway, the cabin lurching as the plane slowed. Heartbeats quickened, eyes darted. The cabin felt like a courtroom, everyone bracing for judgment. When the plane finally rolled to a stop at the gate, the seatbelt sign pinged off, but no one moved. All eyes turned to the front, to the door about to open. Rebecca stood, trying to gather her dignity, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. Monica stayed rooted beside Elias, her chin raised defiantly. Passengers whispered, phones still recording. The door opened with a hiss. Uniformed federal officers stepped inside. Behind them, standing tall in the terminal light, was David Johnson. His eyes locked instantly on his son. "Dad," Elias whispered, his voice cracking. David's expression softened only for him. He strode forward, his presence filling the cabin like a tidal wave. "I'm here, son," he said, voice steady but carrying the weight of fury. Rebecca stepped forward quickly. "Officers, that woman assaulted me, and this boy enough." David's voice cut through the cabin like thunder. He turned to the officers, his jaw set. "That woman assaulted my son." In front of 100 witnesses. "You've seen the videos. Do your job." The lead officer nodded, his expression grim. "Ma'am, you need to come with us." Rebecca's face drained of color. "What? No. This is insane. I was enforcing policy. Policy doesn't involve scissors," the officer said coldly. He motioned to two others. They stepped forward, handcuffs glinting. Gas filled the cabin. Phones captured every second as Rebecca was restrained, her protest drowned out by the murmurs of satisfaction from passengers. Monica squeezed Elias's shoulder. "Told you, baby. You're safe now." Elias looked up at his father, tears welling again. "Dad." David leaned down, wrapping his son in the fiercest embrace of his life. "I've got you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'll always have you." Applause erupted in the cabin. Passengers cheered, clapped, shouted words of support. Elias sat in his father's arms, overwhelmed, broken yet protected, knowing this was just the beginning, because justice wasn't landing at this gate. Justice was about to take flight. The terminal at JFK buzzed with chaos the moment Rebecca Collins was escorted away in handcuffs. The sight of a flight attendant, uniform crisp but wrist-bound, sent shockwaves rippling through passengers and airport staff alike. Phones were raised from every angle. Flashes lit up the corridor, and the chant began almost instinctively from someone in the crowd. Protect his crown. Protect his crown. Soon dozens of voices joined, echoing through the terminal like a rallying cry. Elias Johnson stood pressed against his father's side, his head lowered, the remnants of his crown jagged and uneven. He felt the stares of strangers, but for the first time, they weren't stares of judgment. They were stares of solidarity. Still, the weight of humiliation lingered heavy in his chest. David Johnson kept one arm around his son, the other hand gripping his phone as if it were a weapon. His eyes never left Elias, but his mind was already orchestrating the next moves of a war that was no longer just personal, it was systemic. His attorney Marcus Lee approached quickly, files in hand. David, the footage has spread everywhere. CNN, MSNBC, even international outlets. The lawsuit is ready. We're filing for $25 million in damages, plus injunctions forcing industry-wide policy reviews. David nodded, his jaw tight. Good. I want Rebecca Collins charged as an individual. Assault of a minor. Hate crime enhancement. And I want Skyline Airways exposed for every incident they've buried. If they thought this was about one flight, they're wrong. This is about every crown ever attacked. Marcus's eyes gleamed. Consider it done. Just feet away. Monica Harris stood near a cluster of passengers. Strangers hugged her, thanked her, called her a hero. She looked uncomfortable with the attention, but her eyes kept drifting back to Elias. She hadn't intervened for recognition. She'd intervened because something inside her wouldn't let her stay silent. She knelt beside Elias now, her voice gentle. How you holding up? Baby Elias shrugged, his throat tight. Everyone's looking at me. They're looking at what was done to you. Monica corrected softly. But what they really see is strength. You held your ground. You survived something cruel. And that makes you stronger than her ever could be. Elias blinked hard, trying to let her words in. But inside, his thoughts churned. Why me? Why my hair? Why did she think I didn't belong? David noticed his son's silence. He leaned down, his voice low but fierce. Listen to me. Elias, nothing she did defines you. Not her scissors, not her words. You are mine. You are ours. And you are exactly where you belong. Elias nodded faintly, though doubt still gnawed. He wanted to believe it, but the image of his locks falling to the airplane floor replayed again and again, a wound etched deep in his mind. Meanwhile, across Manhattan, Skyline Airways headquarters was in full-blown panic. CEO Evelyn Marks slammed her palm against the boardroom table. Her composure cracked. Screens around her showed live coverage of Rebecca's arrest replaying on a loop. Stock tickers glowed red, Skyline plummeting by double digits. Calls flooded in from furious investors, terrified board members, and corporate sponsors demanding answers. We need a statement, one executive barked. Evelyn's voice shook. Issue it now. Fire her publicly. Announce mandatory retraining. Commit to policy reform. But even as she spoke, she knew it was too late. The narrative had escaped her hands. This wasn't damage control. This was survival, if survival was even possible. Back at the airport, news crews swarmed. Microphones pushed toward David and Elias as they attempted to leave the terminal. "Mr. Johnson, how do you respond to Skyline Airways' silence so far, Elias? Can you describe what happened? Do you consider this a hate crime?" David shielded his son with one arm, his expression icy. "My son will not be giving statements tonight," he said firmly. "He's a child who was assaulted by someone entrusted with his safety. What you will hear in the days to come is not just about him. It's about every child who's ever been told they don't belong. Tonight, our focus is healing. Tomorrow, the fight begins." The cameras flashed. The microphones recoiled. David ushered Elias into a waiting black car, Marcus sliding in beside them. Inside the car, silence lingered. The city lights blurred past the windows. Elias stared at his reflection, unable to ignore the jagged patches on his head. He felt small again, broken. "Finally," he whispered, "Dad, everyone saw me crying." David turned sharply, his voice filled with conviction. "They saw you endure. They saw cruelty thrown at you and dignity still standing. Don't confuse tears with weakness. Son, sometimes tears are proof of strength." Elias looked at his father, eyes wide, absorbing every word. David reached out, gripping his son's shoulder. "What she tried to cut wasn't just your hair. It was your pride, your future, your identity. But she failed because you're still here. And tomorrow, you'll walk with your head high, no matter how it looks right now." Elias nodded slowly, his chest swelling with a faint, fragile sense of power. Meanwhile, Monica Harris sat alone at her hotel room hours later. Scrolling through her phone, her name was everywhere. The nurse who stood up. Videos of her confrontation with Rebecca had been shared millions of times. Some called her a hero. Others called her reckless. She sighed, shaking her head. She hadn't wanted fame. She had wanted justice. But then she saw Elias's face in one clip, the boy she'd protected, clinging to his father, tears streaking down, but safe. And she whispered to herself, it was worth it. By midnight, the storm had become unstoppable. Justice. For Elias dominated every platform. Skyline Airways had lost 15% of its value in after-hours trading. Civil rights leaders demanded resignations. Politicians called for hearings. Parents across the country shared stories of their children being told their hair, their skin, their identity didn't belong. And in a quiet Brooklyn home, Grandma Ruth sat awake, hands folded in prayer, tears streaming silently. "Lord," she whispered, "protect my baby. Let this pain become his strength." At 7:15 the next morning, the sacred time for father and son prayers, Elias's phone buzzed. David was already awake, his voice steady as ever. "Ready, son." Elias hesitated. "For what?" "For the world," David answered. "Because today, they're all listening." And for the first time since scissors tore through his crown. Elias smiled faintly. The boy who had been humiliated in front of strangers was stepping into something larger. His pain was no longer his alone. It was the spark of a reckoning. The storm had landed, and it was only beginning. The following week unfolded like a storm that refused to calm. Every news outlet in America ran the story. Footage of Rebecca Collins cutting Elias's dreadlocks replayed on an endless loop, always followed by Monica Harris's defiant slap. Commentators dissected every second. Panelists debated the deeper issues, and millions of viewers leaned in to watch a narrative that was no longer just about one boy on one flight. It was about dignity, about identity, about America itself. Skyline Airways hemorrhaged money by the hour. Lawsuits piled up. Investors pulled out. Sponsors canceled contracts. The airline scrambled to contain the fallout, announcing sweeping reforms, mandatory diversity training, explicit protections for natural hairstyles, a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. But the public wasn't interested in promises. They wanted accountability, and accountability now had to face Elias Johnson. David Johnson had been relentless in the days since the incident. He moved like a general commanding a battlefield. Every call he made, every statement he gave, carried weight. Senators promised hearings. The FAA launched investigations. Civil rights organizations declared nationwide campaigns. But David knew the fight couldn't be waged on power alone. Change needed a human voice. And that voice, however young, was his son's. Elias resisted at first. Sitting at the kitchen table one morning, he stared down at the press briefing his father had prepared. His fingers fidgeted with the pages, his voice hesitant. "Dad, I don't know if I can do this. I'm not ready to be the face of something this big." David leaned forward, his gaze steady but gentle. "Son, you didn't choose this. None of us did, but it chose you. And now the world is listening. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest." Elias swallowed hard. His eyes flicked to the mirror across the room. His hair, now uneven and jaggy, was still a wound that hadn't healed. Shame pricked at him every time he saw it. "What if they just see me as broken?" he whispered. "They'll see strength," David replied firmly. "They'll see a young man who endured cruelty and still stood tall. Broken, no. You're unbreakable." Grandma Ruth, seated at the other end of the table, added softly, "Your crown is still yours, baby. Even if it was cut, it's not gone. It's growing back every day. And so are you." Her words pierced through the fog of Elias's doubt. Slowly, he nodded. The next day, Elias stood at a podium in Washington. Deke, his father and grandmother beside him. Cameras flashed. Reporters filled the room. Civil rights leaders sat in the front row, watching. Monica Harris was there too, flown in to stand by his side. Elias's hands trembled as he adjusted the microphone. For a moment, he froze, staring at the sea of faces before him. But then he remembered his father's words. "You just have to be honest." He took a breath. "My name is Elias Johnson. I am 17 years old. And last week, on a flight I boarded with pride, my hair was cut off in front of strangers. My crown, something that took years to grow, something that represents my culture, my family, my identity was taken from me without my consent. And for a moment, I felt small. I felt like maybe I didn't belong." His voice shook, but he pressed on. "But I realized something. What happened to me wasn't about me alone. It was about every black boy or girl who has ever been told their hair isn't professional enough, neat enough, acceptable enough. It was about every person who has ever been told they don't belong in spaces they earned the right to be in." The room was silent. Every word landed heavy, undeniable. Elias glanced toward his father. David gave the smallest nod, a signal of unwavering pride. "I'm not here to ask for sympathy," Elias continued, his voice growing steadier. "I'm here to ask for change. No one should ever go through what I went through. No child should ever have their identity stripped away by someone abusing their power. We need laws. We need accountability. We need to protect crowns, not cut them." Applause erupted. Cameras flashed brighter. Civil rights leaders rose to their feet. Senator Elaine Brooks approached the podium after Elias, her voice resolute. This is why we are moving forward with federal legislation to prohibit hairstyle discrimination nationwide. The Crown Act will not just be a policy. It will be the law of the land. And Elias, your courage is the reason. Elias's chest swelled. For the first time since the humiliation, he felt something like pride blooming inside him again. Afterward, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward. Elias answered carefully, his voice calm. When asked what he would say to Rebecca Collins if he could, he paused before replying. I'd tell her she didn't win. She tried to take something from me, but she only made me stronger, and she showed the world exactly why this fight matters. That night, Elias returned home exhausted, but as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he felt lighter. For the first time, he wasn't just a victim replaying his trauma. He was part of something bigger, something changing. Across the city, Rebecca Collins sat alone in a holding cell, her career in ashes, her name plastered across headlines as a cautionary tale. She scrolled through articles on the jail's battered tablet, watching herself vilified in every corner of the internet. For the first time, the weight of her actions pressed down. But remorse never came only bitterness, only the gnawing realization that she had destroyed herself in minutes. Meanwhile, Skyline Airways braced for collapse. Evelyn Marks issued a televised apology, her voice tight with regret. We failed Elias Johnson. We failed our passengers. We are committing to change. But the apology rang hollow to a public already convinced the airline's culture had allowed Rebecca to thrive unchecked. In Brooklyn, Elias woke to his phone buzzing. Thousands of messages poured in from kids his age thanking him for giving them courage, from parents saying they'd shown his speech to their children, from strangers across the world declaring their solidarity. He scrolled through them in awe, his eyes wide. One message stood out. It was from a boy in Texas. My teacher told me to cut my braids, or I'd get kicked off the basketball team. I saw your speech today. I didn't cut them. Thank you. Elias read it twice, then 3 times. His throat tightened. For the first time, he felt the true weight of his voice. Later that evening, during their sacred 7:15 prayer, David looked into his son's eyes through the glow of the phone screen. You see now, don't you? This fight wasn't just for you. It was for everyone like you. Elias nodded, tears prickling. Yeah, Dad. I see it. Grandma Ruth leaned in behind David, her smile radiant. Told you, baby. Your crown is still here, and now it's protecting others too. And as Elias closed his eyes in prayer, he felt it, the regrowth, not just on his head, but in his heart. His crown wasn't gone. It was reforged stronger, brighter, unbreakable. 6 months after the flight that changed everything, Elias Johnson stood in front of his bedroom mirror. Morning sunlight streamed through the Brooklyn window, golden and warm, casting a glow over his reflection. His hair, once brutally cut, had grown back into short but defined locks. Each twist represented not only regrowth but resilience. His grandmother, Ruth, sat behind him on a small wooden stool, her hands gentle as she carefully moisturized and twisted his new growth. Her touch was steady, practiced, and filled with love. She hummed softly, the same hymn she had sung when he was a boy. Your crown is coming back strong, baby, she said, her eyes misty, stronger than ever. Elias met his own gaze in the mirror. For the first time in months, he didn't look away. He didn't flinch at the memory of scissors or humiliation. Instead, he saw depth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Pain had carved it, but healing had filled it. Downstairs, David Johnson sipped his coffee while scanning morning headlines. Skyline Airways had just settled for a staggering $25 million, the largest discrimination settlement in aviation history. $10 million of it was directed to the newly created Elias Johnson Foundation, dedicated to fighting discrimination in schools, workplaces, and service industries. The rest would fund community initiatives, legal support, and scholarships. But money wasn't the victory David cared about most. Change was real, systemic, undeniable change. Airlines across America had rewritten their appearance policies, explicitly protecting natural black hairstyles. The vague, weaponized language that once allowed prejudice to hide behind professional standards was gone. Now, policies named braids, locks, afros, twists not as forbidden styles, but as protected expressions. And Congress had passed the Federal Crown Act, signed into law by the president, with Elias standing beside him at the White House. The images had circulated worldwide, a teenager once humiliated for his heritage, now smiling proudly as his locks began to grow again, his head held high in front of cameras. That day, the president's words echoed in millions of hearts. Every American has the right to wear their crown without fear, without shame, and without discrimination. Elias thought about that moment often. How surreal it had felt to stand in that room. How heavy the weight of history was on his shoulders. But he also thought about something else, the little boy in Texas who had written to him, saying he kept his braids because of Elias's courage. That message mattered more than any headline. At school, Elias had changed too. The whispers that once followed him, "That's the boy from the plane," had evolved into respect. Some classmates still looked at him with awe, others with sympathy, but most with admiration. Teachers invited him to speak in classrooms about resilience, justice, and identity. At the debate championship, he delivered a closing speech that brought the room to its feet. His topic, equality in America, progress or illusion. His voice didn't waver. His words carried the weight of lived experience. And when he finished, the audience erupted in an 8-minute standing ovation. He won, dedicating his victory to everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. But despite the recognition, despite the applause, Elias remained grounded. His morning 7:15 prayers with his father never stopped. Those moments reminded him that no stage, no camera, no law was more important than the bond between father and son, than the faith that had carried them through fire. One evening, David joined Elias on the porch, watching the sun dip below Brooklyn rooftops. The air was warm, the street quiet. David looked at his son with a softness rarely seen outside their private moments. "You know," David said, his voice low, "I used to think power was about the money I managed, the boards I sat on, the companies I influenced. But I've learned something from you. Son, real power is protecting people who can't protect themselves. It's making sure no one has to go through what you did." Elias turned to him, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and newfound wisdom. "And real strength," Elias replied, "isn't never being broken. It's knowing you can heal." David smiled, pride swelling in his chest. He reached over, pulling his son into a side hug. "You've healed, Elias. But more than that, you've helped others heal too." In Atlanta, Monica Harris had launched the Crown Protection Initiative, a national movement that educated schools, workplaces, and communities about the cultural significance of natural hair. She appeared on talk shows, spoke at universities, and traveled the country spreading awareness. Every time she spoke, she reminded people of the moment in that cabin when silence shattered into action. "I didn't slap for myself," she said in one interview. "I slapped for every child who needed someone to finally say enough. That day, it was Elias. Tomorrow, it could be someone else. We all have to be ready." Her words resonated deeply, sparking conversations across the nation. Parents told their children to wear their crowns proudly. Corporations pledged to review discriminatory practices. Communities held rallies celebrating cultural pride. Rebecca Collins, meanwhile, served an 18-month sentence for assault of a minor with hate crime enhancements. Her name had become a cautionary tale, used in diversity training sessions as the example of what prejudice disguised as professionalism could destroy not just for victims, but for perpetrators themselves. Elias rarely thought of her now, not out of forgiveness, but because she no longer mattered. His story wasn't about her anymore. It was about what rose from the ashes of what she tried to cut away. On the one-year anniversary of the incident, Elias returned to JFK Airport. He was flying to Harvard, having accepted a full scholarship to study constitutional law. His foundation had already funded dozens of scholarships for other students, but today was about his own journey. As he walked through the terminal, his locks longer now and gleaming with health, passengers recognized him. Some smiled. Others stopped for photos. A few whispered, "That's him. The boy from the plane. The young man who refused to be broken." At the boarding gate, the airline staff greeted him warmly. A young black flight attendant with natural curls leaned in close and whispered, "Thank you. Because of you, I wear my hair like this with pride. You changed everything." Elias smiled, touching his crown gently. "We changed it," he corrected. "All of us." Before stepping onto the plane, he pulled out his phone. As always, 7:15 had arrived. His father's face appeared on the screen, smiling from his office. Grandma Ruth leaned in from behind, her eyes still radiant with pride. "You ready, son?" David asked. Elias nodded, his voice firm. "I'm ready." They bowed their heads together in prayer. But this time, the prayer wasn't just for protection. It was for gratitude, for resilience, for the crowns that would never again be cut without consequence. As Elias boarded the plane, the sunlight caught his locks, making them shine like a halo. Passengers watched as he walked with steady steps, not a victim, not just a survivor, but a symbol, because his crown had returned, and it would never be taken again. Elias's crown was attacked, but it was never destroyed. What began as a cruel act of prejudice inside an airplane cabin became a movement that forced an entire industry and a nation to face its reflection. A father's relentless love, a grandmother's wisdom, and the courage of one stranger standing up transformed pain into power. But let's be clear. What happened should never have happened. No child, no passenger, no human being should ever be stripped of dignity because of the way they wear their heritage. Racism disguised as policy is still racism. Silence in the face of cruelty is still complicity. And justice, when demanded loudly enough, has the power to echo across the world. As Elias's hair grew back, so did his strength. His story is not just survival, it is transformation. A crown once cut became a symbol for millions. So the question is, when the next act of injustice unfolds before your eyes, will you stay silent or will you stand? If this story moved you, if it made you angry, if it made you hopeful, show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Stay with us, because more stories of truth and justice are coming.